Welcome, everybody. This is the What is the Challenge webinar. We're going to talk about what the After School Challenge is. This is mainly for people who've never attended, who are first-time participants, or maybe you've attended before, but you didn't get the full experience and you want to find out more so you can spread the word, share with your colleagues. I'm the director of programs. I've been with CalSAC for a little over 2 years, but I've been a CalSAC trainer since 2011. So I've been involved with CalSAC for a really long time. I've been working in the college access youth development world since 2005. I worked with After School All Stars, the Posse Foundation, College Track, Project Europe. So working with youth is really, really super important for me. And although I don't get to work with youth anymore in this job, I live vicariously through a lot of you who provide direct services to students. And so I commend you and I respect you for the really incredible and difficult, but also inspiring work that you do with our young people. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague so she can introduce herself.
Thank you, Sai. And really quickly, we have a question in the chat. Are you able to send the Zoom link so that we can get a couple of peeps who weren't able to log in into our webinar?
Yes, I will do that right now.
Awesome. So Alexis Sly is going to get that to you. Hi, everybody. My name is Kim Cabayas, she, her. I'm from CalSAC, and I am the program manager. We're super excited to have y'all here today. And so I want to get into our objectives. We have quite a bit of stuff that we want to get to y'all, a lot of really great information. And Sly, do you have the PowerPoint still up?
I stopped sharing because I'm pulling up that Zoom link.
Oh yeah, no worries. I'm not used to seeing my face spotlighted here, and so it was a little overwhelming for me to see like a really big video of me versus the little small
I'll go ahead
box.
and remove the spotlight. I'll shrink you.
Thank you.
Okay, I just posted the Zoom link in the chat. You can share that with your colleagues. Go ahead and share again.
Thank you. And so I want to go ahead and get into our objectives so you know how we'll spend our time together today. By the end of this session, attendees will learn about the history and goals of the challenge, and you'll just find out more information about, what is the challenge? What can I expect? What are we hoping will come out of the challenge? So understand what happens at the challenge. And then lastly, you'll find out different ways that you can get involved with the challenge. And so going into our agenda, we're going to start with a warm-up question just to get us all started, get us kind of in the right headspace about the challenge and the info we're going to share. We'll go into an overview, break down what happens at the challenge, some ways that y'all can get involved. We'll have a segment for questions and answers. So if you have any questions as they come up, feel free to pop them into the chat. If we don't get to them right in that moment, we'll have some time towards the end of our time together. We'll get into some next steps and then we'll close out. And this will take less than an hour. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Sly for our warm-up question.
Okay, thank you, Kim. So for our warm-up question, I'm going to show you 4 slides, and your job is to look very carefully at each slide, and you're going to have to guess which of the slides pertains to the challenge. Most people don't get this question right. It's very challenging, so don't beat yourself up if you don't know which one it is or if you don't get it right. Take notes if you need to. If it helps, take a screenshot so you can compare them, because I'm only showing each slide one time. All right, so again, we're going to look at 4 slides. Your job is to guess which one is the challenge. And at the end, we'll ask in the chat for people to type in which slide they thought, if it's slide 2, slide 3, etc. Is everyone ready? Okay, first slide. second slide. Number 3. And last but not least, number 4. So go ahead and type in the chat which one you thought was okay, some people think it's number 4. Interesting. Well, everyone thinks it's number 4. Everyone's getting this right so far. This has never happened before. Most people never get this question right. So pat yourself on the back. Good job. You're on the right track. So what is the purpose of the challenge? The challenge started 20 years ago. We're celebrating our 20-year anniversary, and it's an opportunity to elevate your voices, to give you a space where you can meet with legislators and amplify the message that after school is important. We advocate for a variety of policies, bills, political agendas that at the end of the day support the work that we do with our students. But also it's an opportunity for get together with other members of the out of school time world, and to forge relationships, to network, and to just create community as well. When this first started, it was actually called, it used to be in the summer. And so it used to be called the After School and Summer Challenge. And then the name kind of stuck, and then we moved it to the spring. One of the reasons why we moved it to the spring is because we learned that in the spring, there's actually a window of opportunity to meet with legislators before they vote on bills that are up in the legislative session. The summer wasn't the time where our voices were necessarily, taken that seriously, or whether they paid attention, and so the event moved to the spring, and it's a really unique time because it's right after bills are submitted, and so it gives us a really strategic window to make sure that hopefully people are listening. Now, the After School Challenge is a 2-day event. It's always on a Monday and a Tuesday. And historically, it's always been the first or second week in March. Again, because of the legislative session, and then there's a spring break for legislators where they leave the legislature and bills aren't being considered or talked about. So that's why we generally try to do it the first or second week in March. During the first day is an advocacy training day. So there's a youth track for organizations that bring young people to the challenge. We meet with the youth. Last year, we met with about 65 youth, and we have conversations, there's workshops. We also talk to the youth, and we help them tell their story. Can everyone still see my screen? Okay, so I just clicked on the document. This one's called How to Tell Your Story. And we do a session with youth where we talk about what community issues are important to them, what they wish legislators could do about it, or their communities could do about it, and how after school programs actually support with whatever issue youth are passionate about. So this is a document that we'll share with you if you want to use it, but this is one of just many documents that we use during the youth track to start that conversation with young people. It's really tricky to prepare youth to speak with legislators, because on one hand, they're very inspirational. Legislators love hearing from young people. At the same time, young people can't vote. And so at the end of the day, legislators are worried about getting reelected. So yes, it's going to be fun and inspiring to have young people there talking, but how do we ensure that the message young people are carrying resonates with legislators, because they're not voters? So we navigate that as well. And so we make sure that the message that young people are carrying amplifies their overall policy or agenda that we have as an out-of-school time coalition. Back to the slide here, we also have a parent track. So we haven't always had parents at the challenge. A couple of years ago, we partnered with an organization called Innovate Public Schools. And for the first time, we're bringing a lot of parents to the After School Challenge. So there's a separate session for parents. There's also something called legislative team leader training. So if you want to lead a legislative visit, we can train you. You don't have to be an expert in policy. You don't have to have done it before. It can even be your first time attending the challenge. We have training for people that are going to lead a delegation. And then we also have just general advocacy training for all participants. What do we talk about when we go to Sacramento? What are we asking the legislators to do or to vote for or to sponsor? So this is a document. This is from last year, so don't memorize all this stuff. These are the talking points from last year, and we have a fact sheet. We have budget recommendations. We have all kinds of information to give you the context to advocate for the priorities that we're pushing. And these are just tools that you can use. Some people are really comfortable with policy and data and statistics. Others, like me, it gets too convoluted. I like to just keep it a little simpler. So depending on your comfort level with using data and statistics, or if you just want to tell a story, we have a little script here that helps you prepare and figure out, okay, who are we going to use for this visit? Whose testimonial are we using? Are we using the youth testimonial, the parent? Are we having the providers speak? And this is actually a literal worksheet that we use. So when you break off into your groups, everyone gets a worksheet. You type out your testimonial, or you handwrite it if that's helpful. And that way everyone's practicing what they're going to say at the legislative visit. So all this happens on day one. And there's other stuff too. There's like a youth dinner and other things that we do to build community and to create that sense of community. Day two is the legislative action day. So there's typically a march and a rally. Last year, unfortunately, there was a big storm and we had to cancel our rally in our march. We moved it indoors to a much smaller venue at the last minute. This year, apparently, there's a lot of construction happening in Sacramento, so we're not going to be able to do the march to the Capitol steps like we've historically done. So we're figuring out where that march is going to be. But there's a youth marching band that we have. We have youth performances. Sometimes we had a youth mariachi band. Other times it's been a drumming group. We had Polynesian dancers from BACR actually last year come out and share their culture. And so it's a way to really put the spotlight on the students and on these amazing programs that help make this happen. So in the morning, there's a march and a rally. We always have students speak. We are starting to have parents, and we always have one or two providers also speak about the importance of after-school programs. We always invite legislators to come out and also say a few words. With their busy schedules, they don't always show up. Sometimes they cancel at the last minute. After the rally, everyone breaks up into their legislative visit. And you will meet with your team where you'll get additional preparation, additional conversations. This is where you get the latest schedule. I'm going to skip to the next slide real quick. So you'll get something like this that has who else is on your team, which state senators are you meeting with, which assembly members. It has their office number, their right now, again, because of the construction, they're spread out in very different buildings. There used to be always at the Capitol, but now there's separate buildings that you'll have to go to. And so that's kind of what you do during your prep session. And then finally, after you prep for 3 hours, you go out and you do your legislative visits. So just to give you a highlight from last year, we had over 200 participants who came to Sacramento. We conducted over 120 different legislative visits, including a visit with the governor's office. We hit every single state Senate district, and we hit 79 out of the 80 assembly districts in California. Our goal is always to hit every single legislator. This upcoming challenge is more important than ever because there's been a lot of turnover, a lot of legislators who are retiring or they're termed out. They couldn't run for office anymore. So long story short, almost 2/3 of the legislators are brand new. And so that means that a lot of people haven't heard this message before. They don't know about the challenge. They haven't had a legislative visit. So we really want to make sure we have a huge turnout this year again, so that we can make that mark and we can start to establish relationships with the new legislators that are in Sacramento. So how do we put together the legislative teams? there's an Eventbrite registration link that we're probably going to roll out at the end of November, early December. So everyone registers on Eventbrite. And in this registration, we're going to ask you for your zip code and who's your state senator and who's your assembly member. And it's going to feel repetitive because we're going to ask you who's your state senator, where you live and where you work, and your assembly member in your neighborhood, and your assembly member at your employer with your employer. And that's because we want to pair you up with somebody that you're represented by. And it's really hard to do that when you get 200 people who register. So sometimes we can't get you with this one state senator from your where you live, but we'll be able to plug you in maybe with your state senator at with your employer. So we have a list of every single state senator and assembly member and which cities they represent. We use the registration process to start to pair people up, and then we end up with groups of between 4 and 7 members, and there might be a couple of students there, maybe 1 or 2 parents, and most of them are providers just like yourselves. And this information, by the way, is shared way before the Sacramento trip, so you'll get this like a week or 2 before. It's not something that you find out that morning, although sometimes there are changes because schedules change. So if there's an update, that's shared a day or 2 before. And then when you go off on your legislative visits, what does that look like? So the legislative visits can be sometimes 7 minutes long, sometimes they're 30 minutes long. It really depends on, the availability of the person that you're meeting with. One important thing to keep in mind is that you don't always get to meet with the state senator or with the assembly member. 90% of the time, you actually meet with someone from their staff. And this is a key point that we want to make with youth or with parents, because sometimes there's a perception that because you're not meeting with the state senator, the meeting is not that important, or it's sometimes perceived as a disappointment. But I would argue that sometimes it's actually better to meet with the legislative aide. They're not politicians. They're not running for office. So they tend to be a little more honest. They tend to kind of tell you what's really going on. They're also the ones that educate the state senator or the assembly member on the issues that you are going to be talking about. So it's nothing bad at all if you end up meeting with the director of policy or the director of education instead of the state senator or assembly member. The visit will be, it'll start off with introductions. So everyone introduces themselves. Then you do 1 or 2 testimonials. So again, the legislative team leader of your group will decide, do we have a young person and a parent speak, or do we have a provider and a student? And it's not always the same person speaking at every visit. Remember, you're doing 4 or 5 different visits. So maybe in the first visit, you have the youth speak, and the second one, you have the parent. We want everyone to feel included and to have a voice. So the goal is to have everyone speak at some point. So you might not get to speak maybe until the 3rd legislative visit, but everyone generally gets an opportunity to share. Sometimes you're not assigned to speak. Sometimes maybe your team leader decided to have the parent and the provider speak, but the legislative officer might say, I want to hear from the youth. What do you think? Or what's going on with you? Tell me about your situation. So sometimes that happens. And so that's a bonus because you get more time to amplify that message. Then after the testimonials happen, you make what we call the ask. What is the ask? Well, the ask is the talking points document that I shared earlier. We want more increased funding for this. We want you to vote yes on the McCarty bill. I'm going to go back to that document real quick so I can show you. I didn't scroll all the way down, but if we go down to, here we go. So last year, these are the 2 things that we asked for. Make this a little bigger so it's easier to see. We emphasize that ELOP is a worthwhile investment. We asked for them to approve an annual cost of living, aka COLA. Specifically, we asked for $73 million for ACES in 21st century. And again, sometimes you just make the ask, you just have time to make these 2 statements, or sometimes you have time to actually go into this and look, we have a lot of turnover that's happening in our programs, in our communities. So the ask sometimes is a very concise statement, or sometimes you can get into some in the weeds a little bit and share some of this context. Again, sometimes there's brand new legislators that don't know any of this stuff. We can't assume that everyone's for education, right? So it's important to sometimes share this context. The third ask was supporting the McCarty bill, AB 113. McCarty is a huge advocate for after-school programs. So pretty much every year there's a McCarty bill. So I mentioned that because if you look at some of the old stuff from 3-4 years ago, there might be a McCarty bill. And if you realize, wait a minute, why are these talking points different? Well, the bill reflects, whatever's happening that year in the legislature. So these are the asks. And generally, the team leader is the one that makes the ask, so that, the team leader is going to follow up as well. Let me show you one more thing. So after the visit is over, the team leader will do it's an exit survey. It's a Google form, and we ask them a bunch of questions. There's like 15 different things that we ask. I'm just going to highlight 2 of them today. We want to know, for example, if the assembly member or the senator participated in the meeting. So in this case, you can see that 91% of the time they did not participate. It was a legislative aide who was present. And then we also ask, how do they respond to the asks? These are from 2022. When you ask them to support increased rates for expanded learning programs, what did the legislative aides say? And so you can see how many said yes. Notice that no one ever says no. Again, they're politicians, so of course they're not going to shut the door on you. Most of them said maybe. Whoops. Or purple, no answer. Most of them say maybe, or they don't answer. They're non-committal. Being non-committal, again, it's not a bad thing. These are the legislative aides. They're not always in a position to speak for the state senator and say, oh yeah, he's going to vote for this for sure. So of course they can't give you a straight answer. But oftentimes they'll tell you why. They'll tell you, we don't know about this. We need to do more research. Or a lot of times they'll ask you, well, how many students are in after-school programs in our district? And so usually we prepare you with that information, but sometimes if they ask you something that you don't have, your team leader will say, I will follow up with you. And then we have a lot of partners at the California Afterschool Network, at PCY, Partnership for Children and Youth, who have all this policy stuff, all these numbers and databases, and they can quickly whip up that information. And within a day, you can email back that legislator's office and say, this is the data you requested. This is how many dollars are being spent in your district going to ACES programs or 21st Century, et cetera. So that's the last step, just tracking this information so that we can follow up with them. We can continue applying pressure to ensure that funding for after-school programs continues to be maintained. When I first started at CalSAC and I learned about the challenge and I got involved in this, I was very naive and I thought, yeah, everyone's going to say yes on this. Like, who would be against education? Who would be against, funding these programs? And I remember one time I went on a televised hearing of the state senators and assembly members, and there was an assembly member who basically compared after-school programs to glorified babysitting. And he was very dismissive. And I thought, okay, this person probably doesn't know much in education. So then I Googled this guy, and it turns out that he was a former teacher, middle school history teacher. It gets better. He also chaired the education committee. So that was a really a wake-up call for me, that even when legislators have an educational background, it doesn't guarantee that they're going to be supportive of the programs that we are advocating for and trying to increase funding for. So this is not something we can take for granted. We have to fight every year for this money. We have to send parents and youth and yourselves and keep just hammering this message that this work matters. It's not babysitting. It's not just keeping kids safe after school. There's a lot that goes into this that requires increased continuous funding. So that's an overview of the challenge. I want to open it up to questions. But before we do that, the last thing we're going to do is just highlight the different ways that you can get involved. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim. And I won't spotlight you this time.
Thank you. So how can you get involved in the challenge? There's a couple of different ways. The first option is you can attend the challenge. And, Sly mentioned that it's a 2-day event, but if your organization is not able to send you both days, then you can come just to the second day, which is the legislative and action day. So you don't have to be at both of those. You can attend just one, or maybe you're even available just for part of it, for that rally or that march. The other way you can get involved is by bringing others, whether it be youth, parents, colleagues from your organization, bringing folks out, bringing that passion, bringing that energy to really amplify, getting legislators involved in out of school time and supporting out of school time programs. Another option is becoming a legislative team leader, just like what Sly mentioned, and leading your own little team throughout these visits with legislators. If that's something that you feel called to do, we're going to have a webinar on Wednesday, November 29th. You can sign up on our Eventbrite. It's not something that you need experience in. We'll teach you how to do these things. But, if you feel a calling to be a leader and really be that champion of a team, that's an option for you. Another one is to just volunteer at the challenge. It's a large event. It happens 2 days, like we've mentioned. But there are so many different moving parts in addition to speaking with legislators and creating those teams and being on that youth track and parent track and prepping folks to share their stories and to share what these asks are. We also need people to help run the event and, deliver lunches and keep things moving and help us be all those other gears that just keep the machine moving forward throughout these 2 days. And then the very last one is you can donate or become a sponsor of the challenge. The challenge is not something that's free that we're able to put on. It does cost. There is a cost associated with it. And so if you feel like, hey, one way I want to get involved is by supporting and becoming a financial donor or sponsor of the challenge, then that's another option for you as well. Or maybe you want to do, multiple of these things. I think whatever you're feeling called to do and whatever you can bring your passion and your energy to amplify the work that you do and to share how impactful our out of school time programs are, all of that is welcome to come into the challenge. And so those are a couple of different ways to get involved. Sly, did I miss anything on these 5 areas?
No, you got it.
Awesome. And so before we wrap up, we wanted to get into any questions that y'all have. Sly is the expert here. And so what questions do y'all have for us about the challenge or about getting involved with the challenge? What do we have? What are we thinking? And you can either unmute yourself or you can throw it in the chat.
We can stop the recording now, too. Sometimes people don't want to be recorded asking a question.